Hi, everybody. It's Renee Cormier from the Fractional Referral Network, and I want to welcome Michelle Silva here today, talking about marketing metrics that matter. Fractionals need to know their metrics just like any business person, and so Michelle's just going to take the floor. Michelle's a fractional CMO. Her company is the Savvy CMO. She focuses on helping women in business thrive and find balance. So, Michelle, anything you want to say or add? You go ahead. It's your turn now.
Thank you so much, Renee, for having me. I'm always happy to collaborate and to have great discussions with you on and off the camera, so to speak. So thank you again for having me. And as Renee said, I'm Michelle Silva. I am the founder of the Savvy CMO. I work with visionary business leaders and nonprofits. I really help people to grow their marketing through ethical, values-driven strategies. So today we're going to talk about metrics and why metrics matter. And yeah, I know it might sound like, numbers and boring and, all of that, but trust me, it's super important using data to guide your strategy and to see what's working and make sure that, whatever you're doing marketing wise is moving you toward your goals. Because if you're not moving towards your goals, what's the use of tracking anything, right? So let's get into it. Let's dive in. What's
You have the ability to share the screen. I don't know if you'll need that, Michelle, just
No,
to
I
let
don't
you
need
know.
to. Yeah,
Okay,
I'm
good.
good there.
All right.
So again, marketing that matters. I just think that the importance of having marketing metrics. Whoops, I lost my, there we go. Lost my talking points for a moment. So marketing metrics does sound boring. It sounds very numbers heavy, but marketing is living. Like everything that we do is we're testing it. We don't necessarily think of everything as a test. We just think, oh, we have to do this campaign or we have to do this thing. But it's living and it's always evolving. There's so many different factors that, come into play. It's, who we're marketing to and, all of these things. And I think people forget that part of it. Think of, advertising, for instance, over the last 100 years. Like what's changed? Now we have AI. So, I used to watch Mad Men and I loved that series and how different marketing and advertising was, in the 50s compared to, today and just all of the different things, you have economy, you have lifestyle, it's just constant. So, excuse me. But why you need to track your numbers is to make sure that your business is staying on track with your goals. And that data drives decisions. And I know firsthand that a lot of businesses don't have a data-driven business. They have a gut-driven business. Like, oh, my gut says I need to do this thing, and then it doesn't work, and then they wonder why. And this is because they're not a data-driven organization. So it's really tough to know what's really working and what's not working. Obviously, if you're going by your gut and something's not working, it's obvious, okay, this didn't work. But then you're on to the next, oh, my gut says we should do this. Or you're looking at, what everybody else is doing and what the trends are. And you're not really looking at your own data to know if that's going to work for you or not. So you're not making smart decisions. You're really just maybe tweaking a campaign or, so there's a lot of different things that you could be doing that, you could double down on something that's actually really working well and your competitors aren't doing that thing. Maybe that's, not something you need to hop on the bandwagon about. So that's where I think a lot of businesses miss where they could be looking at the data and sometimes they just don't even know how or what to look for. And metrics don't just equal alignment. So when you look at your numbers, this gets back to, what you should be tracking, and I'll get into that in a moment. But, if you're just looking at numbers for the sake of numbers, you're probably going to miss something because data can tell a story. And if you're not interpreting that data in a way that makes sense for your business and your audience and all of those things, that's where even if you are tracking metrics, maybe you're not tracking the right metrics, or you're not tracking, what is going to get you to your goal. So you have to make sure that you're mindful of that and you have the right person or people evaluating the data and interpreting that for you. So um, so let's get into the next part of this, which is, again, what should you be tracking? So for instance, you could be tracking engagements, so that like, is this working? Are people is it resonating? Is it not resonating? There's a whole other topic that I could talk about where it's like almost like this engagement recession. But Renee, you and I can talk about that later. I know we're all experiencing this right now. I think we have this engagement recession going on where people are starting to check out for a number of reasons. But again, looking at the data, like, are there clicks? Are there, likes? Are there comments? Are people sharing? Like, how is your audience interacting or not interacting? You can also look at conversions. So let's say you have engagement. What's the next step, right? You have to get them through. What I work with my clients is um, a buyer's journey or a customer journey, however you want to say that. It's basically the same thing. And what are the touch points that when they come in from an awareness campaign, what are the touch points to get them to the next step? So is it a sign up? Is it a download? Is it a purchase? Whatever that goal is for that next step, what is the conversion? Is that something you're looking for, or and is it not happening? If it's not happening, that's, data that's telling you something's wrong. Is it maybe your lead magnet isn't resonating, you need to switch it up, or maybe your call to action isn't very strong, or your landing page is terrible, or, there's a whole host of things. But as you go through your customer journey, you'll have conversions at each stage. And if those conversions aren't happening, that data is telling you something is missing, or it's not working, and you need to be like thinking about that and then responding. So how do you
Could,
get people to move down that funnel, right?
could I ask you a question?
Yes.
Yeah, just um, fractionals have a different kind of business, right? They're solopreneurs. Um, a lead magnet is a good thing to have. What would you suggest in creating that buyer's journey for a fractional? How would you suggest they do that using a lead magnet, for example,
Well,
like a
I'm
different
doing
free
that
download
myself.
or book or whatever, right?
Yeah, so I just created a quiz for my business, and it asks 10 questions. I have so I can kind of pre-qualify people who come through my funnel. So I created a quiz, and at the end of the quiz, I created, basically it's like a short or a concise or condensed version of my proprietary framework. I call it the Rev Growth Roadmap. And that's also part of, my whole framework that I'm developing. I haven't found anything that really resonated with me out in the market, and I have joined and this, that, and the other thing, and I just didn't really feel that it resonated with my audience. So I created this, and I'm just starting to do that. So I have a whole series of posts that I've developed through started on Monday, and I'll have one that drops every Monday through June. And it's just a touch point, and it's talking about the pain, and what you might be doing wrong, and infusing a little bit of fun. So some of my posts are going to be kind of funny. One has a clown in it, and, are you clowning around with your business, and, things like that. And just trying to get into the emotion, because we're emotional, we're human. So getting into the emotion of that, you want to create something that resonates. And again, it's all a test. So if my post on next Monday flops, that's okay. I have another one for the following Monday. And so tests, I think a lot of people think if I do it once and it doesn't work, then I need to stop. And that's unfortunate because tests take time and people don't see your content right away because there's a lot of noise in the market. So you have to commit. You have to commit not to 30 days, probably more like 60 to 90 days for doing some sort of test. So that's what this is. I'm going to, I created everything. I created my main landing page. I created the quiz. I tested it all out. I have my landing page at the end where they can get more information and download the resource. And I'll be able to test over time, is this working or is it not working? So that's something that I think when we're thinking about metrics, we think about kind of maybe a one and done, or we think about, short term, but we need to be in the long game. And I think fractionals, because, there's now a lot of us and there's talk, I have a Google alert and I get, a lot of different posts in there from all over the world now about fractional work. And I think fractionals, whether we're fractional or whether we're not, I've been doing, I've been in business for myself off and on for over 20 years. So some of these things, some of the metrics that we tracked years ago worked, and some of the tactics that we did years ago worked. And now they don't. But sometimes you need to get back to basics. And a lead magnet is packaging what you know. So if you are a fractional and I'll just use myself as an example, marketing, and I've been doing this for years, and now I have my own proprietary framework that I'm creating for my clients. I'm packaging that in a condensed version. Yes, I'm giving it away. It's free, but if they want more, then great. Then they can contact me and I'll, work with them. But this gives them the starter. Like they can take it and run. Like they don't even need me if they want to just get started, and they have I give a lot away. So that's that value in advance that I think is super important, is being able to give that away so people can figure out like would they even be interested in working with me. So I hope that answers your question about kind of, the content and for fractionals, and then measuring afterwards. Like, did this work or didn't it? Or maybe my landing page sucked and I can see that the metrics are dropping off. This is going to tell me in my own campaign if it's working or not.
Okay.
Um,
And what are the most important metrics that a fractional should be looking at?
well, as I
Because there's a
said,
lot of stuff to measure, right?
it is. It's a lot of stuff to measure, but I think the biggest thing is like, so thinking about the touch points of this lead magnet, for instance. So let's say you created a lead magnet and, you've got your landing page, you start with your posts because you need people to, engage with the posts in order to get to the landing page and take the quiz. So again, looking at the posts over time, what resonates and what doesn't, I could pivot and for my future posts, do more of whatever is working and less of the ones that aren't. Maybe it's talking about the pain points, or maybe it's adding more humor. So I'll be able to tell over time, at least over the next 30 days, kind of what's working and what's not working, and I can make slight pivots. And then if those are working and they get to the landing page and they don't take the quiz, then it's my landing page. So when you're looking at, engagements and clicks and likes and things like that, you can also look at bounce rates on your landing page. Did those, are those working or are those not working? And then if those are working and they get to the quiz and then they get to the end of the quiz, for instance, you can see how many people took the quiz. So you log in to whatever tool you're using for your quiz and you look at the metrics there. And so again, the data at this point, you're looking at data at every touch point. And when I look at the quiz, are people taking the quiz? Okay, great. Or is something wrong? Maybe they're dropping out and they're not even finishing. So then it's maybe I have too many questions, or it didn't resonate, or, something. So let's say they finish the quiz and then they get to the end and they don't download. Okay, so where is my call to action? maybe my call to action isn't high enough. So if they're bouncing off at the end page and they're not downloading, then that's another area to track that says something's working or something's not working. All of these touch points lead you to, like if you're tracking that landing page and, those kinds of things. And then you can, maybe move that download button up higher on the page. And so you're tracking everything as you go along, and then when they download it, is there something that you're doing to follow up? Like, do you have an automation sequence at the end that says, "Hey, thank you for taking this quiz and following up. Again, here's the email that says." Um, Thanks for taking the quiz. I hope you got something out of it. And again, here's the download. And then maybe you build onto that and you have more emails after that. And again, tracking the open rates of those emails, tracking, where are they dropping off? So each touch point, it doesn't have to be a lead magnet, it can be anything. So if they're in a funnel or they're, in your automation program, workflow, whatever you call it, because there's so many words for it nowadays, but you're nurturing these people into eventually going to the next step, which would be maybe hiring me or setting up a call. All of these touch points are going to be those data points to tell you if something's working or not working. And you can pivot in that whole campaign and know if something needs to be changed. So getting back to, tracking metrics, there's a whole host, but that was just one example. If it's revenue, like if you create a course, right? And your course is not getting filled. Well, what are your touch points? Do you know where your touch points are? And are you tracking those touch points along the way to know where it's breaking? So whether it's you're tracking revenue and it's not getting you the revenue you want, you have to backtrack. You have to go, backwards and figure out like where is it that it's breaking so that at the end of the day, you're making the income that you want, and you're tracking the revenue and the ROI and, all of those kinds of things. Customer retention is a whole other, topic. Are your customers dropping after only a couple of months? And why is that? Again, even if it's a client or customer retention, there are ways to, track that. Yes, Tiffany. Did you have a question? Your hand is raised.
Thank you. Yes, I did. I was just unmuting myself there. Thank you so much for the so far. So just looking at, what you're talking about so far on finding data points, there's post engagement, there's, how many are getting to that first client journey step, right?
Yes.
And then following those touch points back. I mean, I've moved my, offer to connect with me from first post all the way to after a quiz, which I have as well. So, I mean, I guess that's a bit of the adjustment that's different for everyone, but do you know if there's a certain model that you would suggest just to kind of gather more data points, or is it sometimes good to offer that, connection or offer, make the offer right there in that initial post or something like that?
I think again, they're all tests, and that's something, like I said, I've been in marketing for over 20 years, and I feel that, we don't think of everything we do as a test. We're just in go, go, go mode, and we're like, oh, this is going to be the big one, or this next one's going to be the big one. Or, so I don't, so you can look at, I mean, there's all sorts of data aggregators. You can use Google Analytics, you can use, all sorts of, different things. Like for my quiz, I'm using Jotform, for instance. So with Jotform, I can go in and I can look at the metrics and see, how far along they're taking, in the quiz. And then you can, again, if you're looking at your, asking them to book a call, where are you asking them? And then if it's not working the way it is now, then look at a different way, like, have them book the call in advance, maybe, or halfway, there's got to be, a sweet spot at some point for you. And that's where I get it. I think that we're always trying to look at others versus ourselves, and somebody else's program, it might work for them or but it's not working for me. Like, why is that? And again, we don't know all of the details in the back end of their program, for instance. Maybe they're actually getting people, they have a team and they're calling people, or maybe they're, doing different email outreach. You can have, in a funnel. So if you have, like I said, like with your quiz, and you're asking for them to book a call with you at the end of the quiz, right?
Sometimes, um, initially, some of the posts have been, here's a new tool that we have to do a 5-point business assessment or to assess your talent strategy, assess your recruiting retention. I've tried a few different versions of this survey. So it's saying if you'd like to hop on a call to review this assessment results together, here's my link. And it's also then, once you complete this, you'll have some information sent to you with industry best practices, that summarizing or what's the word you look, condensing the service offerings to my area of expertise to say, here it is, here's a get started
So are you
DIY
saying,
solution for you.
so are you saying that neither of those are working for you right now?
I've had very minimal engagement on those things. I've had about a handful of people complete one of the surveys that I had. Again, it's a newer tool, and I think what you just said kind of resonated with me, where you have other people telling you these things work, and it might work for them, but it just doesn't always work for me. So I'm wondering if I'm just mixing too many tools together, or if there's a more streamlined way to go about this,
Well,
because it does feel a little like herding cats sometimes.
it does. And there's so much out there. I mean, think about all the platforms that are out there today compared to 10, even 5 years ago, and now with AI and everything else. But what I would suggest is looking at, what your creative is for your posts, because sometimes your creative and the copy that goes along with it may not be resonating. It could be that you're asking them to engage too soon in terms of, calling you to book a call and things like that. Think about the analogy of a marriage proposal, where, you don't ask somebody to marry you on the first day. You build that relationship. And so that's where the relationship piece comes in, where you're building this relationship and you're giving more value in advance than you are receiving. So if you're not getting much engagement on your posts, it's one, it's not resonating with your target audience. Likely it's also, maybe partner with others, that, would be able to help promote. Like, that's something in our group with the Fractional Referral Network too, is that, sometimes, if you're connecting and collaborating with others, you can say, hey, I'm working on this thing. Would you mind posting and sharing as well? And you may be building something on that, because if it's not being seen, it's the algorithms or something else. You're too new on the scene, so you're going to get, pushed down. Whereas you see other people, they're showing up all the time. Yes, Renee.
LinkedIn has a feature that allows you to repost instantly to your feed. So I have, for example, over 13,000 followers on LinkedIn, but I guarantee you, whenever I post something, doesn't matter what it is, 13,000 people don't see it.
Yeah.
Right? So the importance of creating something and realizing that, you shared it at, let's say, 8 o'clock in the morning. By 9 o'clock in the morning, it's not going to be in anybody's feed. Reshare it shamelessly, repost shamelessly. It's going to start coming up in feeds. And you'll notice that when you do that, that post now gets traction. And LinkedIn's algorithm is such that within the first hour of posting, people have to notice it and comment on it or do something with it. So tag people. Um, um, when somebody likes your post, ask them a question. draw people into draw people into it, and then take that post the next week, share it again in your feed, share it in groups, share it in and if somebody comments on your post, let's say 3 days later, take that post, bring it to life again.
Yeah.
Comment or on the person or on the comment or whatever, share it again. Just keep it going, keep it alive, because the more you keep it alive, the more life it will have. And then that's the true way to understand how engaging something is, because algorithms, especially on LinkedIn, don't work in your favor very well.
They do not.
You really have to be persistent in that if that's where you want to work. And that's where I all of my social media effort goes to LinkedIn, because that's where my audience is. And it's doing that over and over and over again, and shamelessly reshare.
Yeah, and it might seem
Repost.
horrible to us, but
Nobody
we're
knows.
trying to get engagement. And again, and if you are still seeing no engagement after time, this is something to think about. Like if you're doing all of those things that Renee just suggested, for instance, your data is going to tell you this is still a flop, or this is hot. I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. And if it's a flop, then again, look at what the creative is, look what the copy is on that post, look at your call to action on the post. So then once you get that and you get the clicks and you're seeing more engagement, then they go to, let's say, a landing page or whatever the next step is, then that data will tell you, is that working or not working? And so let's say your post on LinkedIn is working great now, and you get to that next step, the data is going to tell you, now this is not working. Something's wrong with my landing page. They're not going to the next step or whatever. So this is just more information, more data that tells you along the way, what you need to do to pivot or not pivot. So I hope that helps to answer a little bit of, your question and concern about, your own lead magnet. Great. So there's a million other metrics. I'm not going to go through all of them, but again, it could be if you're doing advertising, it would be like your cost per acquisition. And even if it's, and that's also whether it's paid or not, but how much does it cost to acquire a new customer? And we often don't think about our own time. Like how much time did you invest? Did you spend 8 hours that day creating that whole campaign? This is part of your customer, acquisition or your cost per acquisition. So some of these things you may not, as a solo entrepreneur, we don't have time, to kind of dig into that granularity. But you can, still look at your click-through rates. You can still look at a bounce rate on your website. So if it gets to your website and you see that they're not going through your lead magnet or your campaign, why is that bouncing? So there's a number of things there that, that you can track. So let's talk a little bit about like how to use metrics so you stay on track. So like the next step is, you have your campaign, you're working through it, you know what you want to track. Now you want to track whether, do you want to track this weekly? How much time do you have? How much, and then how valuable is that campaign or marketing effort? So are you tracking weekly, monthly, quarterly, whatever, your cadence is? But stick to it and be consistent, because that's going to tell you over time. Like if you're tracking, I have my own tracking, it's just manual, it's a Google sheet, and I put my numbers in every week, and I can see if I have it color coded, so I have my target and then it adds up my actual. And at the end I can say, okay, well, if I'm not meeting my target, then how much am I off? Am I off by a lot? So now I'm in the red. And what does this tell me? Or if I'm off by a little bit, maybe I need to tweak a little bit of, something, the color of a button. Small things when you're doing A/B testing. It's not wholesale changes. You want to test, like if you're doing an A/B test, for instance, and you're tracking those benchmarks and looking at that, maybe you only change the color of a button, or maybe you only change what the button says. the actual text on the button, or you only change one element when you're doing A/B testing, because then you won't, if you make a wholesale change, you're not going to know what made that difference. Maybe it made it worse, maybe it made it better, but how would you even know if you changed everything? So that's one thing I forgot to mention earlier. But if you set your benchmarks, like, okay, setting it in, in sand, and, drawing that line in the sand and saying, okay, on this date, this is what my target or my benchmark is this. And then over time, maybe you can, adjust that. And that's your measure to let you know where your progress is, and how you set your expectations. And then you, like I said, you review it weekly, or whatever cadence feels good for you. But you can adjust as you go along based on that. And so with my own framework, like I said, I track different things. I track not only revenue, but I track relationships, and things like that, because I think that, I too have, thousands on LinkedIn and other, things, but does it, in my mind, it's like, I want to really cultivate those relationships. Renee is a perfect example. She reached out to me on LinkedIn, last year, and, I joined her group, and, we've become friends, and that's a relationship that I value. So, how many of those relationships can you really create and cultivate that you help each other? And that is almost priceless. And how do you track that? You don't necessarily track it in terms of, what's the value on it, but it's, how many of these great relationships can you cultivate that will help you move your business? Yes.
Sorry, this is kind of a comment, because I think when you talk about relationships and what we are doing with the Fractional Referral Network, it is about building relationships. The notion that you can join a network or go to even just a local networking group, or meetup or something. The notion that you show up and that people are going to throw business at you is very naive, because we love it, and maybe occasionally it happens, but it's more the exception than the rule. And
Yeah.
it's the effort you make when you join a community. You have to make that effort to get to know people and get to understand what they do and the value they provide, and to be able to refer somebody comfortably and be referred comfortably. You wouldn't want to refer somebody to a client and then find out the person's a bit of a shyster, or what I mean, or like really incompetent or whatever, because that makes you look bad.
Yeah.
So it's about building those relationships and understanding and who you can work with, because if you're going to work, for example, in a company, you're in HR, you're in marketing, somebody else is in IT, and you're going to be a team. you
Yeah.
know you're going to be a team one way or another, and you have to be able to collaborate and talk to each other. So would you rather work with a bunch of people you don't know or understand, or work with people you do know and understand? You'll get a lot more done with that cohesive team than you'll ever get with a bunch of people you have to kind of find your way around.
Yes.
So being in the right place at the right time, cultivating those relationships, that's a metric that's hard to measure. And
It is.
people will say, well, I've been here for 3 months and I didn't get any referrals. Well, how much time did you really spend cultivating relationships, first and foremost?
Yeah.
Just because someone doesn't have a referral today, it might take 2 years, like
I
you
just
wouldn't
referred Tyrone to somebody the other day, and I met
met
him
him a year ago.
last year,
Yeah,
and he was in the group, and he was on one of your webinars,
yeah,
and
yeah,
we got to know each other, and I just referred him to somebody a couple days ago.
yeah. There you go. See, so it does work.
And
but
it's and these are
but
the
it's a
metrics and the data
process.
that you can't put a
Yeah,
figure to, right? That's like
yeah,
these these hidden, metrics that, you just have to cultivate. So, and were
yeah.
you going to ask a question, Tiffany? I wasn't sure if you were going to unmute yourself or not.
I'm trying to time it between the noise here in the cafe, so I apologize. It's just a little
Okay.
distracted. But I really appreciate, again, all of the thoughts and all of the resources so far. I find that what we're talking about with sort of the intangibles, the relationship development piece, I've been digging in on that a little bit more to monitor my time spent. So it's scheduled, it's calendared, it's there. And then when I have calls with people, whether it's for day-to-day business activities, maybe I'm interviewing them for an executive placement, maybe I'm talking with them about an event that I'm going to be doing. If there's not an immediate connection, I put them on a bi-monthly follow-up calendar reminder. So it's either the middle of the month or the first week of the month. So that way I can still track that in some way, because I feel like if it were up to me, my favorite ways of marketing or networking is to be out and with people. I'm a creature of sociability, and I like that. But even when I was doing 2 to 3 events a month, I would have an event assistant following behind me as my ears, because I can't remember anything if it wasn't tracked or if there's not something tangible there. So I feel like if I find a groove like that, and I like, doing events, or I like, the connection piece, I should be able to track it somehow. And I've
Yes.
been encouraged by a few people recently to track what you're doing, track every little thing that you're doing, up to and including the things that I hate, like sending out emails and, maybe even scheduling posts and, just
Yes.
make it intentional and track what you're doing. Because if I say, well, I put out a post on Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and I didn't get anything, it's like, but where were you posting it? What time were you posting it? And all these little nuances that you're reminding me of are really helpful as well.
Yes,
And
I
again,
agree. And that's what I do with my own growth dashboard. My growth dashboard is, like I said, it's in Excel, or actually Google Sheet, and I have different areas that I track. And if you're tracking, like for me, relationships, maybe those relationships are what you're talking about, where you're going, you're having these meetings, or you're having, you're going to in-person networking or anything like that. And this is like more of a sales thing, which I know Renee would probably talk to as well, is like, how many no's do you get to a yes? And so in sales, it's, you have, like, this is kind of going to cold calling or whatever, but if you're making however many calls in a day, in a week, in a month, in a year, or whatever, how many of those no's are going to get to a yes? And so it also helps, which I need to do more of myself, but it also helps to refine, like, what your pitch is. And now we're kind of going off, data, but there are, those intangibles that, we don't necessarily think about. But you're right, as far as, tracking. But I do want to caution, because we can get into tracking everything and then we don't leave time for the doing. So there's that, sweet spot of how much to track, what are the most important things to track. And so that's, just, if it's easy and it's, simple, and you can just get it done and you have a cadence down, great, do it. But then if it becomes a burden, and you're doing all of this tracking and you're not doing the doing part and the interacting part, then that may be something that you need to scale back on, as far as how much to track and what to track.
if I may interject, sorry, but I think also expectations, just as with the networking thing, when you put a post up, like, a post doesn't mean customer.
Yeah.
A like isn't a sale, or a comment isn't a sale, but you've got, maybe somebody likes or comments on your post, and what do you do with that? I'll bet you 99.9% of the time, most people just leave that. They don't
Yeah.
even find out who that person is, or whether or not that person could be a prospect or anything else. And then they go, I put posts on LinkedIn every day and nobody buys from me. I have no customers. Sorry.
It's true.
But and then they get mad at the world, but it's follow up, and being very strategic about, okay, who is this person? What does this person have to offer? Does this person have an audience that I can leverage? And that's another thing that's really important that people overlook. It's not necessarily what someone does for a living, but are they in your market? And do they have an opt-in email list that you could collaborate, that you can somehow, you can't steal it from them, but maybe you can partner in some way, that you do an event together, you do something, and you get yourself in front of their customers, or maybe you write an article for their newsletter. Like, there are things, and then you track those metrics too.
Yeah.
You know,
Those are
these
like
are
the
all things that
partnerships.
matter, but follow up, follow up, follow up,
Yeah.
always.
And I think too, what you're talking about, Tiffany, it's also, when you're in those, in person, we're often thinking about, what's in it for me? What can I get? But it's also, what can I give? Like what, and so that's your lead magnet. That's your knowledge. That's, how can you help that person? Who can you connect them with? Because years ago, this is dating me, but I used to clip out physical things like from a newspaper or magazine, or, even print it, and I would mail it to prospects and say, "Hey, I saw this and I thought of you." Then, of course, email came in. This is all dating me now, but then email came in and I even did this with a woman who I had called her. She was referred to me, and I contacted her via email. She never responded. This went on for almost a year, and she just signed with me last month. And I forwarded, this article. She's an interior designer. And so I forwarded an article about, a latest trend. And I said, "Hey, I thought of you. This was really interesting." And then, I just kept kind of doing that, planting those little seeds. Those are things that you can track. But again, for me, I don't track to that granularity because I don't have the time. But those are, relationship building. And to me, that's just part of outreach. And if you want to, track, outreach in general, I spent 15 minutes, or because it sounds like that's some of the things that you're doing, as well as, kind of time blocking for certain activities. So I know we're getting close to the top of the hour, so I want to just kind of move on, if that's okay.
Yep.
Um, so the next part I want to talk about is like interpreting your data. Like, what if things are going sideways? We kind of talked a little bit about that. Like, the way to track to, when you're noticing that things aren't working, whether, like we've been talking about, like it's a drop in conversions or engagement or revenue, recognizing that your metrics are not where they, should be. And, like what do you do next? Like when that happens, like, do you just shut down and stop, or what do so this is where we're going to kind of dive into that part. So obviously pivoting. So again, thinking of everything as a test. If your metrics are trending down, they're not meeting your expectations, now is the time to make those pivots or adjustments. But how do you go about doing that? Excuse me. Um, Again, just reevaluating your approach, as I said before, looking at your content, your messaging, and your audience. Another aspect of what I do for my clients, whenever clients come on board with me, I work through a foundational um, process with them. I make sure that we really dig deep into their ideal customer or their ideal client, and we get granular. This is a requirement with all of my clients, because I don't want to work with clients who don't know who their clients are. So what are the pain points? What's their demographic? What are the psychographics? What does their day look like today without you? What is it going to look like after they hire you? What are their frustrations? What are their aspirations? All of these things, because when you can get into the emotion and you can get into the messaging that is direct to that person, like think about the person being across from you. If your ideal client is literally sitting across from you at a coffee shop or whatever, what would you be able to do? How would you be able to talk with them? What are their interests? All of these things. These things matter because your messaging is going to be tailored to them. And when they read that post or read that email or whatever it is, they're going to be like, "Oh, that's me." And that's what's going to resonate. And then your messaging is going to get to the right person at the right time, perhaps. And again, to Renee's point, you may need to repeat and repeat and repeat in order to get that message to them. But once you do get to them, making that message relevant, making sure it's clear. I can't remember who said it. Maybe it was Brene Brown. She's one of my favorites. I think she said, clear is kind. So if it's not clear, it's not kind, not necessarily mean, but it's just confusing. And another person, and I don't know where this came from, but they said a confused mind says no. And I totally get that. I created an advertisement a couple of days ago. I shared it with the board and I said, and I gave some options, and I had a very simple advertisement, and then I had one with everything they wanted on it. They didn't choose the one that they had everything on it because it was confusing. So they chose the one that I also made very simple. I reworked the messaging so it's more condensed and simple. So these things are, again, testing, experimenting, new headlines. And like I said, I gave them everything they wanted. And then we ended up going with a different headline, a little bit different creative. And so those tweaks can make a bigger impact when you're wanting to get to that central message. Sometimes too much is not kind. Did you want to say something, Tiffany?
No, I was just silencing another notification that came through,
Oh,
but
okay.
no, this is very helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome. And then again, sometimes, going back to, reevaluating your goals. Like, are your goals the same as when you set out? Maybe they've shifted. Maybe the original targets, are too ambitious. So maybe you need to scale back. I have another person I was working with recently, and she was, thinking that she was going to, you know, sell out of her training, and it didn't happen. So I said, well, instead of going too ambitious, maybe we need to scale down to something that's more realistic. And so sometimes we get super excited about our own stuff, but then when it gets out to the market, it doesn't resonate right away. So kind of reevaluating that goal. And then asking for perspective. Now, this is where the fractional referral network comes into play. Whether you have a team or whether you have a network or whatever, ask people. So for yours, you can post, the creative and kind of ask people. I do that in my own group and say, hey, this is what I'm trying to do. Can you test this for me? Does this work? Like, is this a flop? Like, do you understand it? Is this clear? And then have them go through and test it for you and get to the end. And if like one person didn't even download my download, and I'm like, oh, I put it too far down on the landing page, so I moved it up. All of these things with your network, rely on them, rely on us. We're in Renee's group for, to help each other grow business. So if there's something that's not working, maybe ask the group for some feedback. And then just, being proactive, staying, like I said, keeping up with your metrics and adding them, to your dashboard or however you, track, but making sure that, you have those in front of you consistently, because if you're not looking at them like every week or every month or whatever your cadence is, you may not have enough time to to pivot if you need to pivot. So I'm going to get into some common mistakes. And we've talked a little bit about some of these things already. So vanity metrics. Vanity metrics sometimes can be, you focus too much on the likes, such as what Renee talked about. So just because you get a like, did it really resonate with them, or are they just there to support you? Sometimes my friends and family like my things, and that's all nice and good, but they're not going to hire me, right? So, some of these vanity metrics don't really tell you the full story. They're just, you just need to focus on the metrics that are going to move the needle for your business. And so sometimes those are, they're nice to have, but they really don't mean anything. Or at least not just isolated by themselves. And again, not reviewing your metrics regularly. You need to be consistent. If you're missing opportunities, you won't know how to make adjustments or when to make adjustments. And then when things go wrong, you're kind of already, too far down the path maybe. And so checking them often is important. And also, like I said, don't overcomplicate things. Keep tracking what you need to track, but only focus on, the important ones. Make it simple, because if you make it complicated, you're going to abandon it and you're not going to track anymore. I did that for another client. We were tracking all of these different metrics that she wanted to track in the beginning, and we just removed a bunch. So we're not tracking everything anymore. Maybe we're tracking, 2 things in her awareness phase and 2 things in the next phase, and, and so forth. So again, just keeping them top level so that it's easy to do. And then some tools that you can use to track, like if you're using, like for SEO purposes, I use a tool by Neil Patel called Uber Suggest. I ended up signing up a few years ago, and it's an SEO tool that helps me with keywords and other things. And it was like a one-time buy for 3, I can evaluate 3 websites or 3 domains. So if I have a 4th, I just remove one and add another for a client, and I do my deep dive, or for myself. So you can, use some of these tools. There's another SEO tool if you're looking for, on your website, and you want to kind of determine whether, things are working or not working on your website. You can use the Google products. Google Analytics is free. You can use Google Search Console. Google Search Console is it's not as widely known, but it will tell you if you have issues on any pages. Like, is a page being tracked or is it not being tracked? Do you have an error on the page? Things like that. And it definitely will also monitor keywords. And if you have an indexing issue, and what I mean by indexing is like if there's like some sort of block on the page, you thought you made it public, or there are things in the back end to make a page, whether it's crawlable by Google and the other tools. So it's a really useful tool. HubSpot, there's a number of them. I happen to use Wix for my website, and Wix also has analytics. I know one of my clients uses Squarespace. So there's all these different areas to track metrics. And that's why I use a Google Sheet for myself, because it's nice to see those things, but I need to have like my own dashboard to, kind of put everything into one view, because you could have like 5 or 10 different tools, but what's going to be that one central place for you? So those are just a few off the top of my head. So that's kind of, it in a nutshell. There's a lot of different pieces to metrics. I think the big takeaway is that, just, tracking the metrics doesn't have to be like that headache. If you have the right tools and you have that, simplicity, to make it so that it helps you instead of, takes too much of your time. Getting that clarity, again, clear is kind, and, making sure that it's not confusing. And so those are some, kind of takeaways, is that just really use the tools that you can. You can get metrics on LinkedIn, and like I said, all of these other platforms you will be able to get metrics from. It's just tracking those higher level metrics so that you know what's working and what's not working, and then be able to pivot when you can, and then rely on your team, your network, and others in order to help you determine if something you might have missed. Because as solo entrepreneurs, we're in our heads all day long, and if we don't have a team, like I don't have a team, I rely on my network in order to know if something's, if I've missed something. And like I said, I asked about my quiz. Can you take the quiz and kind of go through everything? And I realized, at the end, oh, she didn't download because my button's too far down on the page. That's a simple fix. had I not asked the network, I wouldn't have known. You know, until, you know, maybe later, or maybe it could have even been a month. And I would have lost, you know, potential opportunities. So that's kind of it. Any questions at this point?
No, I think we're good.
Okay.
So thank you so much, Michelle. I really appreciate your time today, and thank you for joining us, Tiffany. And I will have the video ready later today or tomorrow. Okay?
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay. Have a
Nice
wonderful
to meet
day,
you,
guys.
Tiffany.
Okay. Bye, everyone.